Hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, where even man's best friend tries to get a spotlight onto television. So, it's been pretty much over a month since I last made an episode of AK from England, but I'm finally back, and we were talking about what was supposed to be a spin-off of Doctor Who, but unfortunately never made it past one episode. We are going to be talking about K-9 and Company. So, K-9 and Company was going to be a spin-off of Doctor Who that featured Sarah Jane Smith, played by Elizabeth Sladen, and K-9, voiced by John Leeson, which both characters were companions of the Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker. However, before K-9 and Company, those characters were never seen on screen together. I almost made a rhyme right there. Anyways, so the pilot episode for K-9 and Company, A Girl's Best Friend, premiered on the BBC as a Christmas special on December 28th, 1981. December 28th, Christmas special. Sorry BBC, but you were like 3 days late with it, but that was like, what, 39 years ago? Not really much to complain about. So, the history with K-9 and Company was John Nathan Turner, who was the producer of Doctor Who, starting in the early 80s with season 18, Tom Baker's final season as the Doctor. He wanted to find a way to get Elizabeth Sladen to come back to the show. He wanted to have her come back in Tom Baker's final story, Logopolis, and would have been with Peter Davison, the Fifth Doctor, in his first two stories in season 19. However, Elizabeth Sladen was not interested in coming back to having the same role and function that she had when she originally left the show in 1976. Another problem that John Nathan Turner had at the time was what to do about K-9, because around the time of K-9 and Company, K-9 himself left Doctor Who at the end of Warrior's Gate alongside Romana 2. So, K-9 was a pretty popular character around the time the show was around, especially with children, but K-9 as a prop was pretty hard to work with, and Nathan Turner felt that it kind of made the TARDIS crew, overwhelmingly formidable. So, he decided to give K-9 his own show. However, they realized that, they would have had to have a human character alongside K-9 as the lead, and he decided to have Elizabeth Sladen come back. So he pitched the parts to her, and Elizabeth Sladen, unlike with John Nathan Turner's previous idea with her coming back to Doctor Who, she accepted, her role as the lead human character alongside K-9, and thus the K-9 and Company pilot was born. And this is where the plot of the pilot episode comes into play. So, at the beginning, Sarah Jane Smith wanted to visit her aunt for Christmas. However, unfortunately, as soon as she gets to her aunt's house, she realizes that she actually left early to go on a lecture tour in America, which leaves Sarah Jane Smith pretty upset. However, her aunt's ward, Brendan Richards, breaks her moment of reflection on her aunt's sudden disappearance. And after picking him up at the radio station, they return to the house and they discover a large crate that has been waiting for Sarah for quite some time. When they open it, that's where K-9 shows up, and when Sarah asks K-9 where he's from, he explains to Sarah that he was from the Doctor, and the Doctor told K-9 to give Sarah Jane Smith his fondest love and tell her that he will remember her always. And then Sarah was like, "Oh, Doctor, you didn't forget." So while Sarah is trying to figure out the mystery of her aunt's absence, Brendan decides to, test out K-9, see what he's capable for. And while Sarah was in town, she discovers that her aunt has become disliked by some people because of her blunt letters to the local newspaper editors about growing practice of witchcraft in the area. And meanwhile, Brendan gets attacked while having K-9 analyze some soil, and his attackers were revealed to be George Tracy and his son Peter, and are tied to the Loco Coven. George was able to escape to the point where Brendan wasn't able to make out who he was. However, K-9 was able to stun his son Peter, and he was then interrogated by Brendan. However, Peter then eventually makes an escape when Brendan goes outside to investigate a crashing sound, which apparently turns out to be the accidental destruction of the greenhouse by K-9 while he was trying to look for George. And it was later revealed that George Tracy actually turned out to be Sarah Jane's aunt's gardener, and he was actually called in the next morning to investigate the damage that K-9 caused when trying to go after him. And Brendan was there, and he attempted to brag about the pH balance of the soil, and then George later sharply comments that gardening is more about respect for nature than scientific theory. However, he doesn't betray his more sinister intent towards Brendan, and later that night he sends his son out to capture Brendan while he was asleep, and Sarah at the time didn't notice as she was reading up on, local practice of witchcraft. Sarah then later finds out that Brendan was kidnapped and suspects that George Tracy was responsible, so she decides to have K-9 be hidden inside Tracy's house and investigating on the situation. And eventually K-9 overheard a conversation between George and Peter about sacrificing Brendan to their cult that they had going on. And as soon as George left his cottage, Sarah then got K-9, who then alerted Sarah about what's gonna happen to Brendan. And unfortunately for Sarah, she had no way to tell the police or anybody else in town about it without having to explain K-9, because at the time, only she and Brendan and I guess George and Peter, Tracy to some extent, know about K-9, and nobody else really does, so yeah, that kind of explains it. Realizing that she and K-9 are the only people that are going to be responsible for having to save Brendan, she tries to figure out how to stop the sacrifice, and her first question about it is when it's going to happen. And after using her aunt's books on witchcraft to figure it out, she and K-9 realize that it's going to occur at midnight during the winter solstice, which was just a few hours away. So, and then the where part of the question was a little more elusive, and it did cause the duo to drive around the Shire looking for all the churches. And at the last few minutes before midnight, they finally realized that there was an abandoned chapel on Sarah's aunt's property. And rushing home, K-9 and Sarah are briefly upset at missing something that was right under their noses all along. They did eventually arrive at the chapel that Brendan was going to be sacrificed at, and they arrived just in time for K-9 to use his blaster to stop the priest and priestess from plunging a knife into Brendan's chest. And now that they were all stunned, the group's members were easily apprehended by the police. And then we cut to Christmas Day, where Sarah receives a call from her aunt, who was very surprised that Sarah was worried about her, even though she left instructions for her business partner to send to Sarah. And of course, it turned out that the person that she was sending a message to was the high priest of the coven, obviously the people that were trying to sacrifice Brendan. And Sarah laughs, and she says to her aunt that it's going to be quite a long story when she gets back. Meanwhile, at the very end, we see K-9 trying to connect with Christmas by trying to teach himself to sing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." And yeah, that was pretty much the premise for the K-9 and Company pilots. And yeah, that's really all I gotta say. When I first watched this, I thought it was alright. I didn't think it was anything spectacular compared to a lot of the stuff we've seen on Doctor Who, but It was just there. It was neat. However, this pilot episode was most remembered for its theme song, which was composed by, Peter Howell, who is, of course, well known for doing the 80s version of Doctor Who. So, yeah, and funny enough, the intro of the show itself has been criticized as being really cheesy. Despite the fact that the show was not picked up, the pilot episode actually did well in terms of ratings. It garnered 8.4 million people watching it on its premiere. And funny enough, the premiere of K-9 Company got more viewers than the average episode of Doctor Who during the John Nathan Turner era. And it even got more views than the Five Doctors special, which came out 2 years later, which had 7.7 million people watching it. And yeah, despite the high ratings, like I already mentioned, the show was not picked up. And the main reason for this was because Bill Cotton, who was the original channel controller of the BBC when K-9 Company was being produced, he was, on board with the pilot. However, when the pilot eventually, came out, he left the BBC as the channel controller and was replaced by Alan Hart, who disliked the idea and the pilot episode itself, so that explains why K-9 Company was never picked up as a full series. However, this episode was repeated a year later, in 1982, on the BBC Two during the Christmas period. And the one thing that I often wondered the most about K-9 Company is what this would have been if it was an actual show. I kind of would have been really curious to see what kind of other adventures we would have had with K-9 and Sarah Jane. And heck, we probably would have had, Brendan as a recurring character, but I don't know. Really makes you wonder. But, funny enough, the premise for K-9 Company would later, become a part of another Doctor Who spin-off that came out around 2007 during the events of the Modern series called the Sarah Jane Adventures. This one was definitely a lot more successful, and just like with K-9 Company, it featured both Sarah Jane and K-9, even though K-9 himself only appears in some episodes, while Sarah, of course, was the main character. And to those of you who want to see the K-9 Company pilot yourself, one of the best ways to watch it at this point is getting the Doctor Who Season 18 Blu-ray, which has K-9 Company as a bonus feature, which, here, I'll show you. Look at the back. It even says right here, K-9 Company newly restored complete pilot episode. So that's kind of one way to watch it. However, I did hear the BBC uploaded the pilot episode onto the Doctor Who YouTube channel, which I'm actually going to look that up and see if it's actually on there still. Weird thing is, I don't see it pop up when I looked it up on YouTube, so maybe they might have gotten rid of it. They probably got rid of it around the same time that this thing came out. Who knows? But yeah, like I said earlier, the season 18 box set's the best way to watch the K-9 Company pilot for yourself and see if it actually deserved its own show, which personally for me, that theme song, despite how cheesy the intro and the music itself was, is actually pretty darn catchy, I will say. But with that being said, I think that'll be about it for this episode of AK from England, and if you guys enjoyed it, feel free to give it a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of AK from England, and just more mediocre plush content in general. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. That's about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, I'm going to be reading more fanfiction. Yay!